Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 18th season of CityWide. My guest on this edition of CityWide is Andrew Rasiej, chair of the 38,000-member New York Tech Meetup. Welcome back to CityWide.
Great to be here.
Andrew, you were on the show 3 or 4 years ago, and at that time, you and a small group of forward thinkers were trying to fan the notion that Silicon Alley was an actual thing, that it wasn't just a half dozen computer programmers that didn't want to live in California, but that there was actually a tech sector in New York. Only 3 or 4 years ago, people were skeptical about that because traditionally, New York's economy had been driven by the FIRE industries, finance, insurance, real estate, and now it's 2014. What happened since then?
Well, Ken, internet, mobile technologies, science have created an explosion, a transformative moment, not just in New York, but around the world. And New York City is experiencing this renaissance in technology because it has incredible amounts of human capital, talent, at a depth and breadth that's greater than any other city in the United States and could be argued in the world. And so where Silicon Valley in California created the infrastructure that laid the groundwork for the 21st century economy, New York is actually living in the application layer where the advantages aren't based on the technology so much, it's based on human capital.
And the designers, the creative people, and the content, where the content capital.
Exactly. So what's happening in New York is it's no longer technology for technology's sake, it's technology as applied to finance, to insurance, to healthcare, to the media industries, to advertising. And if you add social media on top of that as a new device or a new tool, you're really seeing a transformative change.
So just as an example of that, and I want to talk about what the New York Tech Meetup is in a second, but your organization just partnered with other more what I'd call traditional business organizations to do a study of the tech sector in New York. What did you find?
Well, we defined that we shouldn't be calling it a tech sector. It could have been defined at one time as a tech sector, startups and small businesses focused on technology, but what we wanted to do with the study was to try to show data that would prove that this wasn't just about some startups, this is about all of New York's traditional industries converting themselves. And our partners in that study were Association for a Better New York, Bill Rudin's group that has been a longtime champion for the future of New York, Google, which is a well-known technology company that has a lot of employees and a big presence in New York, but most interestingly, Citibank, or Citi, which now thinks of itself as a technology company, not a bank. And we did a couple of case studies to show that, again, that this is transformative. The New York Times was a case study. The New York Times is no longer just a newspaper company, it's a digital company. And so what we tried to show was that this is a tech ecosystem, not a tech sector, and that it has huge public policy implications for how the city thinks about its education system, its infrastructure of transportation, its infrastructure of real estate, in order to be able to respond to the demands and to take advantage of the opportunities that technology in the 21st century provides.
Let's take a large law firm today. They have an intellectual property department. They have partners who deal with trademarks and copyrights and patents and license agreements and the like. Do you consider them part of the tech sector?
Well, certainly law, is being affected as well because the tools that are available to lawyers, for example, you can't do any kind of discovery today without forensics associated with the technology. Knowing where the emails are and how to look at files is a growing and bigger part of the practice of law. But also being able to access all the data, the historical case studies or cases in court and the details associated with them can also be now searched and quantified in ways that never were before possible.
And that large law firm New York office is going to have multiple IT people. It's the people at the top who are dealing with cybersecurity. It's the people in the trenches who are making sure that
the email works.
The email works and people can get on their iPads. Are those people in the tech sector?
Yeah, well, we should talk about what it means. There's tech jobs as they relate to people who are specifically working in tech companies, computer and science engineers, coders. And then there are tech workers who are working in tech companies but doing what would be considered traditional work, so whether it be accounting or human resources. But what we discovered in our study was that a non-tech worker in a tech company makes 45% more than the same non-tech worker in a non-tech company.
Do that one more time. So we're talking about
An accountant, a human resources person.
I don't know if they have secretaries at Google, but an administrative assistant at
correct,
Google
is more likely to make 45% more working in a tech company than they would working for
Why is that? Because they have more money? Or?
Well, for a couple of reasons. One is that the tech companies, not even if those employees are doing work that would otherwise be considered traditional, they are required to be knowledge workers. They need to be of the culture and understand how the company works and what the company's goals are. Also, the pay level at the tech companies is higher because there's demand. There's huge demand for talent. So it sort of lifts all boats to some degree. And that's the thing that's so interesting about that shift. But to answer your question about the lawyers again, is that the lawyers, they not only are thinking of themselves as tech companies, but they are now creating entire practices around software patents, for example, and what are the rules associated with crowdfunding, for example, to start new businesses. So there's an entire new kind of practice that's coming out of the technology industry and law as well.
Why New York?
Well, it has amazing infrastructure. It's the greatest city in the world. It has the highest quality of town. It's the most diverse. It has great transportation, higher education, finance. But it also has what I think many people believe is the greatest sort of legacy of being known as the leading city for the United States. And so if you're going to start a company, that adage, you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, people still believe that. And so because of the way in which technology is now in the hands of so many more people, so much more accessible, and you take that with the traditional values or the traditional assets that New York has had, you now have this renaissance that's happening.
So as a city, though, it seems to me that if you stick a shovel in the ground anywhere in the central business district, in Midtown Manhattan or in the financial district, you're going to probably strike more fiber than there is in half the world. But as a city, aren't we really behind some of our competitors in terms of the availability of high-speed internet, both for businesses and for individuals?
So yes, New York has great opportunities, as I just mentioned, but it has great challenges because its infrastructure is also decidedly 20th century. Our subway system is a late 19th century,
Right.
early 20th century technology, and we can't make it a state-of-the-art subway system tomorrow. You'd have to rip up all the streets and start from scratch. So you have to deal with, to some degree, some of the legacy of the infrastructure of New York, and that makes it hard. It's a lot easier to lay fiber in a field in Virginia than it is to lay fiber in the streets of New York. But there are new technologies that are coming out all the time that are making it easier. For example, there's point-to-point wireless that allows basically a microwave connection between two buildings to be able to deliver high-speed broadband. And the cellular technology continues to get better and better over time. So there's wireless broadband and then there's wired broadband.
The mayor and his advisors have recently been talking about the digital divide. They don't necessarily use that phrase, which goes back to the early days of the internet, but the notion that lower income people simply don't have the same access. They don't necessarily have the ability, they don't necessarily have FiOS in their neighborhood. They may not be able to afford it if they had it. And if they did, they'd be struggling to buy a computer, and maybe they have a smartphone.
Right. So the issue is that the cost of high-speed broadband to your home, whether it's FiOS or whether it's a Time Warner coaxial cable, is about $70 or $80 a month. And for a working class family to spend $700 or $800 a year to have access to the internet. It's beyond their reach. And so we all know that in order for New York to be able to participate in the 21st century economy, it has to create a pipeline of talent. So that means we need to think about how to wire our schools, how to wire our kids, how to wire our libraries, and how to wire our underserved communities so that they can participate and create the workforce for the 21st century.
So when you look at the tech sector, both the non-tech jobs that are higher paying, the tech jobs themselves, however broadly defined they may be, is there also a race divide? It seems that if you are from the poor neighborhoods in New York where the schools have been in a devastated condition for generations, that where they're struggling to do basic things like teach kids reading and math, that their ability to participate in the tech sector, or people who immigrants who come with language impediments, so is the tech sector for everybody?
Well, so first of all, tech by itself is not a panacea that's going to solve all these problems. But there's historical, social, and economic problems in a lot of these neighborhoods. The diversity factor is one that we think about a great deal, particularly related to women in technology and how to get more people of color in technology. And if you look at the way the education system has separated by race or economic opportunity for decades, it's not like instantaneously you can create that, solve that problem. However, an organization I started a few years ago called Mouse, MOUSE.org, that started wiring public schools and trains kids in public schools how to use technology, is producing a new generation of young people who in those communities are starting to use these tools and are building new lives for themselves and finding their jobs and basically leapfrogging over the social and economic inequity and finding themselves a place in the 21st century economy.
One of the digital strategists that I spend a lot of time with talks about digital natives, people who are, let's say, 35 and under, who have always lived in a wired world. They've always had an Xbox or some other gaming system. They're much more comfortable with the full potential of a cell phone. Is just that kind of cultural immersion, it being part of everyday life, does that sort of help smooth some of the historical barriers for people of color to get into these kinds of opportunities?
Well, I think that, interestingly, for example, with social media and Twitter, African American men are actually the greatest users of Twitter than any other single group. And they actually have an equal number of followers as they do people they follow. They actually use it sort of like mass text messaging. So some of these tools are actually being used by diverse communities in ways that are surprising. But you touch on something really, really interesting, because a quick story, during the Arab Spring, when in Egypt, when in Cairo, people were protesting on the streets and using social media and the internet to organize themselves, President Mubarak shut the internet off. And what happened was that people who were following the protests at home did what we would do in New York if the internet was shut off or if power was shut off. We went out into the streets. And so there was this surge of people out into the street. And a young sociologist from the University of Texas by the name of Dave Perry wrote this great line. He said, "You can shut off the public internet, but you can't shut off the internet public." And so in
fact, what it did was it validated that it was real.
It was real. So when you say digital native, I think that the bigger term, or a more proper way to think about it is that there are members of the internet public, and for them, they think in terms of networks. They are aware of the fact that they can connect with each other through social media, that there may be a border, but they can get the YouTube video across the border, that they can organize themselves for meetups, that they can use these technologies in ways that are empowering. Now, what's missing is there's a disconnect to a large degree between government and public policy and that phenomenon. But when you can take, on a political level, where you can create a political movement like the Arab Spring based on technology, or a video like Gangnam Style from Korea gets 1 billion views in 3 months around the world, you start to realize that humanity is starting to realize it's connected. And the people who are part of the internet public are going to start asserting themselves in various ways, maybe not immediately, but this trend is not going to stop.
I want to talk a little bit about how technology can transform government and how government is transforming technology when CityWide continues right after this. Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Andrew Rasiej, chair of the New York Tech Meetup. So in the first half, we talked about the transition from finance, insurance, real estate, maybe the transformation of those industries as the tech sector incorporates them. I'd say there's the wire. Let me try this out on you. Web, information, research, and education is the new wave. What should city government be doing to advance the tech sector, or the tech ecosystem in New York? I want to talk about what tech can do for government in a second, but what can government be doing at this point?
Well, government can do a lot. Obviously, our study has shown that technology can lift incomes and actually can provide jobs. So the challenge for the mayor and the challenge for the city is how do you make sure that that gets spread throughout all of New York, not just in the Manhattan district where most of the businesses or tech businesses are currently located. So a lot of that has to do with one of the things we talked about, which is broadband, to make sure that there's connectivity. A lot of the real estate in New York is also 100 years old and doesn't have the capacity, so that if a tech company moves in with 100 employees and they all have to be online, there's not enough wire in the building to be able to service them. So how can the city incentivize building owners to upgrade their buildings? Maybe they get, if their building gets wired to the state-of-the-art level, maybe they should get first in line at the buildings department to get their permits signed off, or maybe they should get a couple percent off their real estate taxes. What can the city do to incentivize getting state-of-the-art infrastructure into the physical buildings? And in a lot of these neighborhoods, it's not about just building office buildings, it's about creating collaborative work environments where there's the coffee shop, there's the co-working space, there's the residential, and people are living in a much more collaborative environment than the notion that we used to have from Mad Men days, that you lived in the suburbs and you commuted to the central business district. So infrastructure is one thing that they can do. The second thing that I think is really, really important is workforce development, because a lot of the workforce development programs, and the city spends over $500 million a year on workforce development, are focused on training people for jobs in the 20th century. And how do we get them to be trained for jobs in the 21st century? So the salespeople, the marketing people, not just the coders and the scientists.
Will government be good at that? It seems to me that just to the point where government started to train people to fix ATM machines instead of to be bank tellers, you know, they got to the point where there's probably nobody in government that knows what bitcoins are or how they're going to affect the city.
And maybe they don't need to, but those programs are not it's not workforce development programs that the city specifically runs themselves. In many cases, they give grants to nonprofit organizations who are doing that work, and many of those are also struggling to catch up with the 21st century. But I can give you an example of one in Queens called Access Code that is teaching coding skills to diverse communities, young professionals who were trained. Some of them went to college to study accounting or marketing, but didn't have any actual experience with technology. They're training them, and 99% of the kids who have graduated through that program have now got jobs in tech companies. So it's possible. It's not going to happen overnight, but you know, this transformation is happening in New York, is happening in other parts of the country and the world. So the demand for high quality engineering talent is going so high, there's no way that New York can import enough to satisfy the conversion of our traditional industries. So we need a pipeline, and the city can make a difference.
Well, let me ask you about this, because we have a new mayor, Bill de Blasio, who used social media very effectively in his campaign, and has personally endorsed the efforts of his deputy mayor, Alicia Glenn, to engage with the tech ecosystem. But a lot of people felt that it was a growing consensus over the last few years that there had to be an emphasis, and to use another acronym, on STEM: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. The president has talked about it as a national crisis, a national shortage of engineers, and there started to be a real, I think, consensus in the civic community in New York to put more of an emphasis on that in the city schools, in the elementary school and high school level, and the city colleges as well. But this mayor wasn't elected to do that. He was elected for universal pre-K, for after-school programs, for addressing other kinds of curriculum issues, and we haven't really heard from him or from the school's chancellor that STEM is a priority for them in terms of their educational policy. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I think that they're just getting started, and I don't think that they've had quite enough time to put together their team and build the plan, but they've started to indicate through the announcement that Maya Wiley was going to, his council was going to focus on broadband infrastructure, and that the new deputy mayor for economic development, Alicia Glenn, is looking at this study that we did on the tech ecosystem and trying to think about how is it going to change the way the city thinks about its economic development. So universal pre-K became an issue because the data showed that if you start educating young children early in their lives, you can actually change the trajectory of their future. So this mayor is looking at the infrastructure, and I believe that this mayor also understands that technology is a tool that can help him create a more equitable city in terms of the economic disparity that we've been seeing happening over the last 10 or 15 years.
He did endorse the Bloomberg initiative to create advanced science schools. The competition, Bloomberg set out to have one. I think we're going to wind up having
Cornell Tech
four.
Down, right. So Cornell Tech Down is great, but he's also identified that CUNY, which we're here in one of its facilities, is a great resource that could also produce great science and math graduates. But I want to be careful because too much emphasis on science and math, we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because the humanities are also a very important part of education. But technology can help there too, because the storytelling and the way in which these technologies allow for the distribution of stories and the humanities is also stronger than it's ever been before. So I think this mayor has been given some time to put his team into place, but I do believe that he's going to align his policies of economic diversity, economic equity, and social justice with the potential of technology to help make that happen.
You mentioned the fact that the universal pre-K concept was driven by the data. So is the city of New York good about mining its databases? Big data is the sort of the byword for every corporation in the world these days. So putting aside how we can use technology to transform government, where do you think the de Blasio administration should go in terms of using its information resources as a way to identify and support policy initiatives?
Well, so first of all, the city of New York, its infrastructure and its government is also decidedly 20th century. Mayor Bloomberg was able to move the ball a little bit using data and data analytics to make better decisions on the operations level, but there hasn't been a wholesale sort of reboot of all of New York City government in decades. And so another challenge for this mayor is how to get the city government to be on the same parallel track as we're seeing not only just in the tech sector, but also in all of New York City's traditional industries. And there are some interesting ways to do that. One is to create some data standards so that all the agencies are collecting data the same way and sharing data with each other so you can see the connections between what's going on with the fire department, what's going on with the housing department, so you can see where the problems might lie and where a solution could be found much easier than waiting for a disaster to happen. But secondly, citizens themselves are collecting lots and lots of data as they walk around with their smartphones. And so there's a lot of open data around cities that's also now available. So where in the 20th century, with the internet and technology, we might have thought that governments could become e-governments. When you take the newly collected data and the citizen collected data and put them together, you have an opportunity for what we like to call, at Personal Democracy Media, we government, which is the notion that it's a collaboration between the city and the public. Take a picture of a pothole, put it on a map, let your community vote on whether it's the most important thing to be fixed in that community at that given time. Or creating an environment where people can participate in city council or city planning meetings where they don't just have to show up at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday when most people, working class people, can't show up, but maybe they can participate virtually, either by remote video or through comments that they can leave by sending them electronically. There are ways that the city could actually start to use these technologies to make themselves more accessible.
You're involved with two organizations. We have to wrap up, but just tell us very quickly, New York Tech Meetup, what is it? How does somebody get involved with it if they want to? And the same thing with personal democracy events that you do.
So thank you for asking. So Tech Meetup was started by Scott Heiferman, who's the founder of meetup.com, which is a platform that allows people to organize meetings on any subject that they want.
Frisbee, Chinese food,
And
whatever.
in 2004, when the tech sector was not so strong in New York, Scott started his own tech meetup his own meetup called the New York Tech Meetup in New York, and 4 people showed up. And the idea was that people should just come and show what they're working on. The second meeting was 20, the third meeting was 100, and slowly over time, over the last 10 years, it's grown to 38,000 members. And once a month at NYU, 1,000 of our 38,000 members, we sell out in 1 minute when we put the tickets on sale, come and watch a dozen companies demo what they're working on. And the most interesting thing is that we don't allow business model questions. The idea isn't to talk about the business. The idea is to show, what did you build? Do a show and tell. And the people who come initially were technologists, but now, per the tech ecosystem analogy I gave earlier, the people in the audience are lawyers, doctors, accountants, artists, who are trying to understand how these technologies can either make their jobs easier, how they might help them start their own startup, or how they can build a life for themselves in the 21st century. And so they're coming to learn. And so we think of it as a community, and it continues to grow, and we're hoping that more and more people start their own meetups. In fact, there's 200 other smaller tech meetups that are part of that ecosystem that we don't actually run, that were started by members, one on video, one on women in tech, one on Africans Americans in tech, a Latino tech meetup, an open government data tech meetup. So there is clearly a lot of energy around this, and that's what the New York Tech Meetup tries to do.
And in terms of personal democracy, so you've been a big advocate for many years of people, of the fact that being able to look at government and look inside government differently basically gave citizens the power to affect things in different ways. Doesn't it also create opportunities for abuse, for policy panics, and for bullying and things like that?
Sure. So the internet, the internet is a reflection of what goes on in the real world, and so there are many good things and there are many bad things, and some things get amplified, some bad things get amplified, some good things get amplified. It's a tool. You can use a tool to create progress, you can use a tool to create damage. So we have to remember that. But after the Howard Dean campaign, when bloggers and blogs created what was known as the net roots, it was pretty clear that the internet was going to impact politics. And when you saw how Barack Obama used the internet in 2008 to help raise a lot of money online, and then data analytics in 2012 to get reelected, you can see that technology is not benign as it relates to politics. And if you, as I mentioned, the Arab Spring, or even the protests in the Ukraine, people are using these technologies, and so it has political implications. And what Personal Democracy Media is trying to do is to bring Republicans and Democrats, people from diverse communities together. We don't argue politics. What we argue is whether technology can make government more transparent, more accountable, more effective, and whether democracy can be made stronger because people are connected to each other.
We may be fortunate to be living at an inflection point in terms of the tech sector and the transformation hitting a point where it's going to grow exponentially, as Tech Meetup did. We're going to have you come back and give us periodic updates on it. My thanks to Andrew Rasiej, chair of the New York Tech Meetup. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us in this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY-TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or contact us at CUNY.TV.